Welcome back again, everyone. ResearchWorks podcast here at the pre-conference workshop in Maulbronn at the EACD, the IAACD Conference 2025. And with me is a very special guest, someone I look up to, my mentor, Professor Ros Boyd. How are you?
Good, wonderful, thank you.
It's so lovely to have you here in this beautiful setting. The birds are chirping. We're under this amazing tree with the old monastery behind us. Gosh, you and your team have put together the most amazing conference for us to experience. I thought we'd start with a little bit of your role and how you came to be here as in the position of IAACD. And tell us the story, Ros.
Look, it's been a long story actually, because originally I was involved in an international cerebral palsy conference, which started in Canada, back in Quebec.
Right.
And then it went to Finland. And then we got invited to do it in Sydney in 2009.
That's right.
So Sarah McIntyre and I called up Rob White in the middle of the night and said, "What do you think? Can you sponsor it?" And he said yes.
Wow.
And so we did 2009, which was the biggest World Cerebral Palsy Conference in those days, at 1,300 delegates. We had to get 2 extra boats for the harbour cruise because of all the extra people.
Beautiful.
But it was the first sort of, I think, in Australia where we brought all the internationals to Australia.
Yeah.
So then we handed, and in those days you handed the baton on to the next group, and there was 3 criteria.
Right.
It had to be scientific, it had strong science, it had to have a really nice location, and to be, good people to work with.
Yeah.
So we handed the baton on to Giovanni Cioni to run it in Pisa, where, of course, we had the most beautiful conference in Pisa.
Yeah.
And then he handed it on to Hans Fosberg and Anki Eliasson for Stockholm. So then they changed it into being the IAACD, and that was drawn together sitting on a bus in Ukraine from the Black Sea. We'd been at a conference for the WHO on the setting up a sort of guidelines for early support for children in low resource settings.
Right.
And I was sitting on the bus with Hans and Bob Armstrong. And Hans is saying, "I think this needs to be an international alliance of academies." So I was there. They probably didn't notice because I was the sort of female there. But so that's how IAACD was born.
Wow.
And then Hans spent the next sort of 12 months getting all the 3 original academies together.
Yes.
And then bringing other academies in. And then I've continued for each of those meetings as the conference organising chair. So the representative from the IAACD as sort of the conference planning.
That's amazing.
So then we were Anaheim.
Yes.
And then now we're Germany, in Heidelberg.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah.
What a story. I love that story. And I love when ideas are born on, unsuspecting places, on a bus on the way from the Black Sea. It's pretty incredible.
Yes.
But to convene a conference, to do all that takes a lot of work, Ros.
Well, the locals, Rainer Blank and Sebastian, have been fantastic.
Yes.
And whole team around them. Rainer, with his enthusiasm, wanted an enormous scientific committee. I think in Sydney we had 3 core people, and here he wanted over 45 in the scientific committee alone.
Wow.
But no, everyone's been fantastic and really on target.
Yeah.
Lots of meetings over the last 3.5 years. So I won't miss those 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. calls, but
that's the thing with international,
exactly.
all the time zones.
So I'll be fairly happy to hand that over on Saturday to 2 people after me. But no, I think it's all well organised, and we've got a great setup. They've got a really good protocol for the next conference. And I think the main thing is that it's a really popular and very important joining together internationally of the minds. We've got true representation from all continents, over 90 countries. But the great thing is, when you're in this role, you get to design the content, which was great. And as Darcy Feeling said to me, she said, "I can see your finger all over those pre-conference workshops.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been here listening to a lot of the speakers who've been, particularly at the early intervention day yesterday,
Yes.
of which you coordinated and shared. And again, you can definitely see your fingerprints in all of this, Rog, which is wonderful. Tell me some of the highlights that you found from that entire day of just great speakers. Yeah.
I think the important thing is, we had our first meeting for the early intervention sort of guideline back in 2014.
Okay.
And that was in Vienna.
Wow.
And since then, obviously 2017 published the first paper. But, it's great to see all the multi-site international randomised controlled trials. But, the challenge is we've got 2 that have shown effectiveness, the REACH trial that we led from Australia, and also Kath Benfer's trial in LEAP in Bangladesh, in India. But most of the other trials haven't had really strong effects yet. So we've still got a bit of work to do. But to me, yesterday, the highlight was coming together the content of the intervention and what works was a theme throughout all the presentations.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was the coaching model of families.
Wow.
And that families become the centre of it. So we've moved from a traditional therapy model of the therapist being the expert coming in and telling the parents what to do to guiding and supporting the parents to be the best teachers for their child and to be the centre of this.
Yeah.
And that's what works.
Yeah.
And we started with, in the morning, the evidence from the REACH and GAME trials, and Gunki talked about her sort of translating her baby Kimt into home-based version. So, we've got to be more flexible because families don't want to turn up at a rehab centre necessarily for frequent therapy, not when babies are small.
Yeah.
And then the other elements we went on in the and talked about the visible study. And so you gain what you train in that we've shown really high improvements modifying the environment for babies to improve their vision.
Beautiful.
Which is pretty groundbreaking stuff because no one's been game to do a randomised trial of early vision intervention. And then in the afternoon they went on and talked about implementation of trials and in low resource settings.
Yeah.
So Golam Mullah has done this amazing project in India and he's seen over 4,000 families through his model of having ASHA workers trained for surveillance.
Yes.
And then the Canadians followed with their implementation work, which is part of the next step, really.
Yeah. Talk us through a little bit more about that because implementation, and I've spoken to Alicia Spittle before and I said, what's on the horizon? She's like, well, we need to make sure we're implementing here. I think that's a really vital next step. Where are we with implementation?
Yeah, and that's not easy. It's not simple. People think it's straightforward, but I mean, Leanne Saksowski does our heads in a bit because it's kind of it seems really simple because it's about do people adopt the new information and how faithfully, with good fidelity, do they actually deliver it? But actually what we found in the REACH trial with Kim, who was our PhD student, is that it's about the enactment of the parents. Yeah. So that's it's like a Chinese whispering campaign from the experts, the leaders to the coordinators on the ground, to the therapists, to the people delivering, the peer workers, and then to the families. Yeah. But I think implementation it's a sort of how do you change people's clinical thinking and how do you change their relationship with their family, which is often very good, but is it sort of a paternalistic relationship or is it a more supportive, boosting, coaching relationship? Yeah,
that's really true. Do you think that's why we're seeing in countries, well, like Golem's work and LMIC, why we're seeing the impact of implementation there, it seems to be exploding in terms of the work that you've been part of with Kath Benfer as well. Is that the difference?
Absolutely, and the work we've done too in Georgia, in Eastern Europe, in our Born to Get There program with Andrea Gazzetta. Yeah. The team in Georgia under Nana Tashashvili have done the most amazing job in 3 years. They've taken on board all early surveillance all the early intervention, and they're now doing the vision impaired babies. And
right.
I mean, in 3 years to get all that sorted is
Right.
remarkable.
Yeah.
So we've done systematic training on general movements high and all the different tools. They've implemented that right across the country during COVID.
Wow.
And now they're even changing their whole system. So their problem is that they have a very high number of babies with really severe birth asphyxia because they're born in the mountains and they don't have easy access to the tertiary hospitals.
Right.
They don't have helicopter transfer.
Right.
So babies can't get cooled. So they don't have all the sort of treatments that we have. So they've got a high number of babies with severe quadriplegia and dystonia.
Wow.
And high number of babies with CVI.
Yeah.
But now they're starting to think, well, how can we modify this? How can we get those babies to the hospital, get that early, very early treatments,
yes,
better care,
yes,
and they'll reduce their numbers.
Yeah.
And the same in India. Since we're in India with the LEAP study originally, the senior medical people there, Aaron Singh, have changed what's happened nationally, that all mothers now have babies in hospital.
Wow.
Whereas previously they used to be born in the village with an ASHA worker.
Right.
So that's got to reduce the rates of brain injury and early cerebral palsy.
Yeah. So what's the challenge there then for countries like Australia, countries like in Europe or the US, when it comes to implementing what we're knowing now is probably working more?
Yes.
What do we do? Because I suppose there, in a way, there's implementations not just about, I guess, adopting the new. It's also abandoning things that we might be quite comfortable with, or it's how we've trained. And
what we're very wedded to.
Yes, that's
exactly.
right. Because that's a big challenge, right? And people have often
Yes.
spent a lot of time and money investing into that. And yeah, what's your
I always said it
advice
was
and
harder
message
to
there?
teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was a therapist who trained in one of the last Bobath courses. But, you know,
Yeah.
I think it's about people rethinking
Yeah.
their practice.
Yeah.
And I was just in London at Great Ormond Street. And it was interesting because I'm back there where I'd been when I was working in England. But, you know, things that I learnt then still hold true. I remember Sophie Levitt said to me, who was sort of one of my mentors, she said, when you go into the room, I don't want you to touch the baby. I don't want you to handle the baby.
Yeah.
I want the mother to do everything because that sends her a message that she's the expert and you've got to boost her confidence. And I think we've got all the knowledge in high-income countries, but we haven't really rethought about our relationship with families.
Sure.
We still have that slightly, you know, we know what we're doing.
The expert
The
model.
expert opinion, kind of expert-led thing. And I think for the younger therapists, if we can rethink that and just think it from the parent's perspective,
Sure. Yeah.
we'll be more successful. And I think that's something that comes out of a bit of experience.
Yes.
I remember also when I was in Sydney working with Vicky Mead, and I went to see a family, and I couldn't understand why the parents were so depressed and didn't seem to be taking on board anything I was saying. And Lee Ma and Vicky Mead said to me, well, you know that they're the stolen generation. And I said, like, what are you talking about? I hadn't really any knowledge. So I think it's about thinking from a different perspective.
Sure.
What are the parents thinking? What are they taking on board?
Yeah.
And actually that's what we found from the REACH study about the enactment.
Yeah.
You know, letting the parents show us what their achievements are. What are they thinking? What's successful?
It's very powerful.
What is challenging? I think it's subtle.
Yeah.
And it's the same in our LEAP surveillance. When we started the LEAP early surveillance, we went to the First Nations communities in northern Queensland and said, you know, we want to start helping you. And they said, we know about that thing, cerebral palsy. We're more worried about autism and that thing about fetal alcohol. So we completely changed what we were doing. We talked less about identifying cerebral palsy, and then we used the word high risk, and they said, you're going to take my baby away, are you?
Wow.
So we thought, okay, we have to rethink all this. And so with our Indigenous PhD student, Leanne McRamsamy, who's presenting some of the work here, we've completely changed the language, the way it's delivered, and we've moved in North Queensland from only a 50% success rate of families coming back after their baby's been in special care to now over 85%.
Wow.
The health system's absolutely thrilled.
Yes, of course.
Because we've had as they said to us, if you get them and then you get them at hello, you've got them for life.
Yeah. It's that relationship, isn't it? That's coming through strongly more and more these days. And it's all very tangible and it's all within our hands, so to speak, to be able to make these changes. I suppose, what's the future now for early intervention after everything that was presented yesterday and still for discussion, I suppose, today as well? Where are the gaps? What's the future?
I think the gaps are still at not only, I think it's now in training clinicians and getting them to implement. I think we need to do a few implementation studies.
Yes.
I don't think it's a case of just handing it out to them and doing a few webinars. I think we actually need to coach therapists. How could you do your early intervention more successfully on evidence base? Because it is a rethinking mindset.
It is.
Yeah, you know, and I worked a lot with psychologists when I was a young therapist, and that was really helpful because they said, I want you to think about every single word that you say to the parents and how they might perceive that. And that was really good training. That's one thing I think we need to do in high resource settings.
Sure.
I think we've got a lot of the rest of it covered. We know the sort of areas that we should focus on, but the areas that we don't do well is vision impairment, cerebral visual impairment. We don't know enough about early screening, about early intervention. I think Andrea and I'd like to run a big international trial in high-income countries, and I think that would be a good place to start, and low-income countries. And then I think we've got a lot of responsibility to work with our neighbours in low-resource settings and to help them implement all these things, because we shouldn't be training them on old approaches.
Absolutely.
We should be training them on what's current now.
Yeah.
And LEAP's a great example of that.
Yeah. Well, that's such incredible work, and I'm looking forward to speaking with Kath Benfer, who's one of the keynotes here as well. Looking forward to speaking with her later on and hearing her keynote and just seeing what's happening globally, which is the whole idea of this conference, isn't it? And to see the common themes, but also where the differences are and where we can learn from each other. And that's come through already, Ros. So congratulations on putting together the most amazing, the most incredible program that we all get to be part of right now. So thank you. And thank you for sharing with us about the Early Intervention Day yesterday. That was absolutely fabulous.
Well, thank you for being here. As I said to Raina, we're very lucky to have you and your team, because this is broadcasting all the work out there, and we know a lot of people are listening across all continents, and that's the whole value of this.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just those who are lucky enough to come in person, but it's everybody else who's online that can get all this latest information.
That's right. It's the whole idea, isn't it? We're all trying to do our part. So thank you for having us here, and thank you to all of our listeners. Again, another great talk. Always wonderful to know about the history and the heart behind why conferences like this even exist. And it's such a privilege to be part of it and to hear the stories and to be excited about what the future holds and what we can all do individually as clinicians and researchers as well. So thank you for that, Ros. And we'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.